Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where we will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that we can move through our pain to get the kind of healthy relationships we want, need, and deserve. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based out of Oakland, California. And while I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational in nature, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Some of the information presented on this podcast may be sensitive or triggering in nature to some of my listeners. Therefore, listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the show. You are in for a treat for today's show, and I've been getting a lot of requests from my listeners to have attorneys talk about divorcing a narcissist, and so I have a very special guest for today's show, which we are going to be talking about high conflict divorces with a narcissistic personality. And, you know, we're going to be discussing some of the things that came up in high conflict divorce. And so my guest for today's show is Mr. Steven Peskind of Peskind Law Firm in Illinois. And he's going to talk all about his expertise and experience in divorce. Good morning, Steven. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Doctor?
I'm doing well. I want to thank you again so much for being on the show. And I've had a lot of requests to have an attorney on the show to talk about divorcing a narcissist, maybe even children being involved in the marriage. And I know I've read through your website, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you do and your expertise and your experience.
Well, so I have a general family law practice that has an emphasis in divorce. I've been practicing for over 35 years at this point. And as my practice evolved and as I became more experienced, I started getting sought out to handle high conflict cases. And one of the types of high conflict cases is a divorce from a narcissist. And a friend of mine who's a divorce lawyer said the other day that if Mike Rowe were to take his Dirty Jobs program and make it for white collar people, divorce lawyers should be featured, because particularly dealing with narcissists, it's a very difficult task. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you're starting to see a lot more of this stuff. Can you tell people who don't know, what is a high conflict divorce?
So there are various degrees of conflict in any sort of case. You have on one side of the scale, people that are cooperative, that are amicable, that are problem solving, that are putting their children first, that are trying to end the relationship with dignity, okay? So then we move down the spectrum to the other end, and the other end involves people that are willing to figuratively burn down the house rather than allow their spouse to get their share. And they will litigate ferociously, they will misrepresent facts, they will hide marital assets, put their income in offshore accounts, whatever they can to basically screw their spouse. So that's the high conflict divorce.
Okay. And when people come to you and they want a divorce, what are some of the top reasons that you've noticed as to why people are divorcing?
That's a really good question. I would say generally, I mean, there's a variety of reasons: infidelity, economic, etc. But the primary reason is, to use a metaphor, during their busy lives, they're not tending their garden. So what happens is weeds grow up in the garden, and instead of pulling those weeds out throughout the course of the relationship, they grow up and they overtake the garden.
Mm-hmm.
It cuts off the flowers. And
Mm-hmm.
so people just generally become distant and emotionally not connected anymore, and the weeds choke out the love, and the grass is greener, and I'll be happier on my own or with somebody else. That's, I would say, the predominant thing I see.
Absolutely. So basically, it's something that's based off emotions. Either the emotions are gone or the emotions are running high.
Yeah, that's fair. Yes.
Okay. So, and then you had mentioned on your website about, not divorcing based on emotions, or basically, you had said that your wife had suggested to you that each litigant spend like 15 minutes with the judge, just kind of airing out their feelings or the reasons why. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. That my wife was a very wise woman, and many years ago she actually said it, that if people had an opportunity to vent to the judge and just basically complain about their spouse for 15 minutes and get all those toxins out of themselves, they would be able to then proceed more cooperatively towards, a reasonable conclusion. People do need to get out the toxic emotions. One of the things that is kind of a disconnect for a lot of people is
Yes.
that we have a no fault based system of divorce. Um, I think there's a few exceptions around the country, but 90% of all jurisdictions say we're not going to consider fault behavior, conduct, good guy, bad guy sort of stuff when we divide up the assets or resolve the case. So when your spouse hurts you, and this is a person who you trusted, you shared your life with, your bet
Mm-hmm.
with, whatever the case may be, and they hurt you, and you were profoundly in love with this person, or at least you thought you were, your reaction isn't kind of a mild aw shucks. Usually you're angry or you're devastated and you come unglued.
Yes.
I'm talking broadly, some people
Yes.
handle it better. But so they're forced to now not be able to express their anger in a controlled way about why they were betrayed, because the court system won't let you do that anymore. And the lawyers are always saying, well, time out, that's not relevant. The courts don't want to hear that. It doesn't really matter. This is where counselors come in, because that's where I'm always trying to ship my clients off into
Yes.
the counselor's office to try to work through that grief and to work through those emotions.
Yeah, I bet you see a lot of that. And I would imagine not only counseling, but some um, sense of coaching. And I think you have a divorce coach as part of your practice too, because I imagine that, with these types of situations, things can also become very emotional in the courtroom.
They can. And I mean, they're emotional all over the place.
Yes.
People are very brittle and very fragile and very emotional. And so we see that everywhere, from not being able to complete their financial
Mm-hmm.
disclosures because
Mm-hmm.
they become paralyzed with fear and they shut down. Or when people are going to court for the first time, I take it for granted. I lived in a courtroom for decades, but we need to always remind ourselves this is a very terrifying place for people. So
Absolutely.
we try to nurture people through the process, and our lawyers, our coaches, our paralegals, everybody in my firm is constantly trying to help people be comfortable with the process and help them move through the process.
With that being said, I imagine that things can sometimes get very complicated on your end when emotions are getting in the way of cases moving much more smoothly. Are there things that people do that can sabotage divorce or
Every
your job?
Yeah, every day. Yeah. Self-destructive behavior it's toxic. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I remember years ago, my wife had gotten me and this is in the days of the cassette player in the 19,
Okay.
a Tony Robbins tape set.
Yeah.
One of the things Tony Robbins talked about, he had this metaphor for certain people with low self-esteem. when things are starting to go good in their lives, like a thermostat, they kick on the air conditioning and chill it out, or they kick on the heat and make it hotter. So they self-sabotage, and that always resonated with me because I see people that are doing things that just make no sense. And, you know, I just wrote a blog about one of my observations for the last 35 years of being a divorce lawyer is divorce is driven by emotion, not by logic.
Yes.
And it's very difficult when you're a lawyer trained in analysis and logic and being sensible, so to speak, to appreciate the emotional frailty of people that are making really stupid choices that, you know, you just scratch your head. But again, that's driven by emotion.
What are some of the things that you've seen people do to sabotage their divorce cases?
They don't follow up with assignments. There's a lot of homework that's involved with a divorce, financial disclosures, things of that nature. And that's a really good way to aggravate a judge when you don't get your paperwork done on a timely basis. That's more of a banal example. Other examples are where people are being convinced, and this is a classic, this is chapter 1 of the Narcissist playbook. People are convinced that their lawyer is not looking out for their interests. And they've got their narcissistic spouse whispering in their ear, telling them that their lawyer is doing a terrible job for them and they shouldn't trust their lawyer. And so they start to mistrust their lawyer. And when that happens, everything deteriorates. So that's another way people will self-sabotage by not trusting their lawyer. And that's not to say there are some crappy lawyers out there. People should get a good lawyer who they trust and then listen to the advice of their lawyer. If they don't trust their lawyer for right or for wrong reasons, they should get another lawyer. Another way that I see people self-sabotage is being advised by well-meaning family members or friends or the guy at the bar who they met about legal strategy. So I'll have clients coming in and they'll be urging a course of conduct by me, a legal strategy, based upon what their girlfriend Sally told them. And again, we have these mixed loyalties. Well, am I going to listen to Sally or am I going to listen to my lawyer? And things go off the track at that point. So, I mean, these are just a few examples. I could talk for 4 hours.
I'm sure you can, because I'm sure you've seen it all. In terms of the clients that come to you, tell me a little bit about the typical client that comes to you.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting because the typical client for me when I was, say, 30 was a marriage of under 10 years, a couple of little kids. Husband had a job, mom was either home with the kids or maybe she had a part-time job. And so as I've aged, as my hair has kind of grayed a little bit, my cases are different now. So now my typical cases are, again, me. They're 60.
Okay.
I'm not getting a divorce. But, you know, people that are older, that are financially settled, their kids are either in college or out of the house. I deal with, because of my experience and my reputation, I get a lot of complex cases that involve businesses or complex child custody cases, child relocation cases, things of that nature.
Yeah. I'm wondering, when you're working with your clients, how are you as an attorney able to spot the spouse is a narcissist? Or maybe a narcissist, in your opinion.
I can't diagnose, certainly. And
Sure.
I use the term not in a clinical sense.
Sure.
I use the term more in a behavioral sense.
Sure.
So if I'm hearing that there are threats You're not going to get anything. I'm going to see to it that you don't get anything. If I have a spouse that is very insecure and afraid of their own shadow, that usually is an indicator to me. Particularly when the spouse has been excluded from any of the financial information in the family. It's stunning, really, how many people I see that literally know nothing about the family finances, have never even seen a tax return.
Wow.
And excuse my pronouns, but it's usually a he who is the dominator in the
Sure.
relationship, and he will file the tax returns and either sign her name or file them electronically, whatever the case may be. And so these are sort of the tip-offs that I see. And then it really starts to reveal itself as the case unfolds. And I see, like, here's a good example. And I didn't realize this until I read a book by Robert Greene, who I'm a big fan of. And Robert Greene has a book called The Laws of Human Nature. And I think his second or third chapter was dealing with narcissists.
Mm-hmm.
And what he talked about was a narcissistic, he calls them a malignant narcissist, is somebody who doesn't have internal resources to soothe him or herself. And when they are attacked, they become angry and paranoid, and something that you or I would take as just kind of a whatever. They will get so riled up about it, they will attack mercilessly. And I have a case like that right now. And in fact, this afternoon, I have a hearing with the court on that sort of an issue. And so when I see that sort of behavior, people that are reacting much more aggressively than are warranted under the circumstances, that's another tip off for me. So the bullying and threats, that's predominant. I get that at a consult. I can usually pick that out early.
Is that bullying and threats towards the spouse, or does that also extend to you?
It will merge. It will blend into me. One of the other things in my insights over 35 years of being a lawyer, I discovered that I really need to become flattered when I'm hearing all this nasty stuff directed towards me personally, because that means I'm winning. At least in their mind, I'm winning, and we are doing the job for their spouse. So what the narcissistic personality will generally try to do is to drive a wedge between myself and my client, to try to take away, to remove the threat, who's a lawyer, to their loss of control. So they get in the client's ear, and when they're living together, it's very easy to do that. Every single day, you just constantly hammer, your lawyer did this, oh, he's just trying to take you for more money. Your lawyer did that, oh, that's, my lawyer said that that's insane. And try to chip away at the client trust. The client becomes very vulnerable, very insecure, and that way they really then can be exploited in the divorce case.
Awesome. Those are very good suggestions. Being that you've done this so long, part of me wonders if you've ever found yourself representing the narcissistic personality.
Not well. Not well. If I'm representing somebody who I think is unreasonably taking advantage of their spouse, I'm sure I've represented narcissists.
Yeah.
Robert Greene says we're all narcissists.
Yeah. So, correct.
If I'm representing somebody who is taking advantage of their spouse, or acting in a way that is unreasonably aggressive, I don't really have much willingness to do that sort of thing. And I'm in good company because I read an article. Abraham Lincoln also, when he was a lawyer, he never liked to handle cases for the quote bad guy. And
Good.
That's a dangerous territory because everybody's got some good and some bad in them, I think. But But when somebody's acting over the top, I'll usually get out of that case. I usually just won't
Take it.
I don't have the fire in my belly to help somebody treat somebody poorly.
That's awesome. Good to hear. You did also mention too that there were a fair amount of people that come to you that don't know about finances in the home.
Yes.
In your experience, if you had to like assign a percentage of people that don't know about the finances versus those that do, what sort of figure would you spit out at that?
I would guess about, and again, my particular practice is going to attract those sorts of people because
Okay.
they need somebody who will be an equalizer for them.
Okay.
So I would say 25 to 30% have like some knowledge, but an incomplete knowledge. I would say maybe 20% have zero knowledge, don't have any idea. And then the rest, it's kind of a level playing field.
Okay. And so when people come to you, what do they want you to do?
Well, that's a good question. And that's what the first thing I'm really trying to do is to identify what the goal is, because different people have different goals. Years ago, I represented a woman who was married to a very wealthy man. I think his net worth was about $30 or $40 million. And she was in her mid 60s, and we sat down and we talked, and she said, you know what, Steve, life is short. I don't want to spend any more time than I absolutely need to with this awful process. I want you to get me $1 million and a fishing boat. And I'm moving to Florida, and I want to get this case done. And I always admired that, because instead of what I would typically see, which is, I need to get the most that I can get. And that's just really common sense. And it's financial planning, it's the rest of my life. I need to secure myself. But this woman knew exactly what she wanted. She had a goal, and it was very achievable, and we helped her accommodate that. So different people have different goals. Some people want to hurt their spouse. Okay, again, I don't like that. I'm not good with that. I'm just not, I'm not a punisher. That's not my personality.
Can you say more about that piece? Like when you say hurt their spouse, what are they looking for exactly?
Pain. I mean, they are, they're sort of psychic pain, right?
Yeah.
They're looking to pay their spouse back. Maybe it's, I never felt appreciated. Maybe it's, you were never nice to my mom. Maybe it's a malignancy. Maybe the person's just evil. I don't know. But there's a variety of reasons. And it's exhausting for me trying to talk people out of bad behavior. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I think the kids really need to know why we're getting a divorce, why their life is being ruined, why they have to leave their house, because their mother's a whore. And I think that's fair for me to tell them the truth. I'm not going to lie to my kids. And I will try to rationalize with these personalities. And I'll say, well, you lie to your kids every day, and you should lie to your kids every day. I will never lie to my kids. I said, so hypothetically, if you and mom were intimate last night and the kids heard noise in your bedroom, and the next morning you got up and one of the kids said, hey, what were you guys doing last night? You would not say, I was on top of your mother going at it. You would say, oh, mom and I were playing a game or something. So I try to rationalize with people, but it's not a rational thing, right? They've got this sore tooth that they get this pleasure out of poking around in, and that's the sort of conduct. So very, very frequently, after the shock wears off, people moderate their behavior, and they realize, that's not cool to do. Other times, people never move out of that angry mode, and that's when my relationship with them suffers, because at that point, I'm wanting to get out of the case.
Yeah. How long do your cases typically take? And I imagine that it might change based off of finances or assets or just other things, other nuances that go in there. But how long do cases typically take especially if people are emotional, as you say, and they're wanting to hurt or they're wanting to lash out?
Um, well, the median length of time for a divorce is 1 year. And so that means half of them are more than 1 year and half of them are less than 1 year. And so cases that are highly litigated or complex, or cases involving businesses where you need to hire business evaluation experts, and those cases are going to go on longer.
Mm-hmm.
Low conflict cases, and a good number of cases, my associates will typically handle more routine cases. There's a lot of times that we have people that will call up and say, we pretty well worked out everything already at the kitchen table, and all we really need you to do is to draft the paperwork and help us get that done. And
Mm-hmm.
those cases are done in a few weeks or a month.
That's awesome.
That's a successful divorce.
Yeah, that is a very successful divorce or uncoupling. With that said, with a case that runs about a year, financially, how much does that cost?
Depending upon the level of conflict, it can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I don't,
high conflict costs more, right?
yeah, absolutely. Do they have an understanding of that
Yes.
when they come into it, do you feel like some of those decisions where people become high conflict, are they truly understanding, or are they just running off of the adrenaline of the emotions? Like, I don't care what it costs. I just want this to happen this way.
Yes. So it's not rational.
Yeah.
A dollar fighting over a dime.
Right.
Right? And I have that speech 20 times a week with people. But it's not, again, it's not driven by rationality. It's
yes.
not by logic, it's emotion. And what terrifies me is somebody that will say to me, I'd rather pay you than give my spouse any money. And the reason it terrifies me is at the end of it all, when the thirst really hasn't been quenched, they're not going to want to pay me either. Yeah. So now, that being said, there are some very rational personalities and
yes.
really good business sense where people will sit down and say, all right, if we go to trial, what's your best case scenario for me? So you can get me an extra $25,000. Got it. So if we were to go to trial, what would the legal fees be?
Okay.
They'd be about $15,000. So my best case scenario, I get 25. That means I'm gambling 10. And so they go through this whole kind of thoughtful analysis and they'll say, let's just settle. So we see a lot of that as well. It's not all anger and emotion. I mean,
good.
People.
When things, when you see that this is going to be a high conflict case, because I'm guessing with your experience, you can tell pretty quickly, oh, this is going to be one of those high conflict cases. What is it that you advise your clients to do in order to most effectively manage it?
I don't necessarily have specific advice for them as much as I prepare them for the possibility of the case heading in that trajectory, right?
Okay.
I try to spend a lot more time, personal face-to-face time or Zoom-to-Zoom time, with people early on to build up the emotional bank account, to make a lot of deposits in the emotional bank account so that the trust does stay strong. And this isn't just high conflict cases. Our firm keeps people apprised of every development in the case because knowledge is power. I feel better when I get information. So we load people up with as much information. I will give them books or references to books that I think might be helpful. There was a book written years ago. I think it's called The Psychopath Next Door. You may even
Oh,
know.
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
So if I think people are interested in learning about what's happening in my life, I'll give them those sorts of references
Mm-hmm.
and look to. I'll get everybody to a therapist or a psychologist if it looks like the case is going to be high conflict. I have a particular therapist, a local therapist, who I don't know if she would describe it as a specialty, but she represents or her patients are abused homemakers in
Mm-hmm.
her heart. And she's actually referred a lot of people to me. And she's the one who, and my clients, a number of different clients have shared this with me. She talks to them about the frog in the boiling pot, where if a frog is thrown into a boiling pot, he'll jump right out. But if a frog is in this pot and the heat is turned up, he's just going to swim around until he boils to death. And that's a terrible metaphor for a vegetarian. But the point being that every day, a little bit of your soul is being chipped away and you don't realize it. And it's hard to rebuild your identity
Mm-hmm.
after many years of that happening. So that's why I think therapy is always helpful for people.
Right.
Being confident and optimistic and positive and giving people pep talks, that's important.
I would imagine there's a fair amount of doing that because this gets to be very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even for yourself, you have to do that. um, one of the things that I wonder about too is kids, children.
Yes.
And that how that can get pretty messy. I know that you've talked about custody as well as parents that just want to kind of take their children and leave maybe. Can you talk a little bit about what high conflict looks like with children in divorce?
It's just the worst of the worst. I mean, people fighting over money, I don't want to minimize that. That's money's important and you need money to live. But when your child is being abused mentally or alienated from you
Yes.
or severed from you, and it's obviously very difficult.
Yes.
And one of the other things on that subject, a lot of times I will see a situation, let's say I'm representing a mom, and dad has not participated and has not been involved with the kids, has really been disinterested. And the divorce comes on, and now all of a sudden, he either wants primary custody
Mm-hmm.
or he wants 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, for years, I had a knee-jerk suspicion that either he's trying to hurt her or save child support or had some malevolent motive. But I had a friend who got a divorce 20 years ago, and he was that dad. And when he got his divorce, he wanted to spend more time with his kids. They didn't have a custody case, they agreed on that. But what he said to me is, I now realize what's important. And I didn't before. And that's why we got a divorce. And so I'm a little less judgmental.
Okay.
I want to spend more time with their children.
Yes.
And our laws are kind of evolving in that direction. At least in Illinois, our courts are being much more receptive to child sharing arrangements, whether it be 50-50 or 60-40% of the time. 15 years ago, the likelihood of a non-primary parent getting more than every other weekend was very small. So, and I suspect if you have two good parents, spending a lot of time with their parents is a good thing.
Good. Right. Do you feel like, I heard you talk about finances and how difficult that was and how people kind of want to hurt their spouse through finances. Do you feel like children are much more difficult when that is a part of the divorce? Do you feel like the fighting is more contentious or more drawn out or any of that?
Well, it's another layer of stuff for people to fight over, right?
Mm.
It's one more issue we can fight over. Illinois changed our law 5 years ago. We got rid of the word custody because it connoted power, control, winning, losing, that sort of thing.
Smart.
So now we have to decide parenting time when the kids are at mom's house, when the kids are at dad's house, and decision making. So it presumably lowers the level of issues that people have to fight over. Anecdotally, I've not seen people fighting less because human nature doesn't change. Semantics can help, but they just move the fight to other areas.
I see. What about, you had talked about in terms of location, when people want to take their children to leave. How does that play out in court?
It's zero sum. You know what I mean when I say that?
No.
So you either win or you lose. If you were to go to court on a contested child custody case, I might win 30% of the time and I might get 25%.
I see.
Or you can negotiate those sorts of issues, or money. I won 10, you want to pay me 5, we settle on something. I'm either moving to Florida with the kids or I'm not. So the emotions go up because people are terrified. And I have this suspicion that with the way that our culture is changing as a result of COVID, courts may be looking at relocation cases a little bit differently.
Mm.
I had a debate with my daughter, who's a lawyer at my firm, who says courts will be looking at all cases differently, but that because a parent-child relationship is still going to presumably need to be face-to-face. And she's probably right to a certain degree. I just think courts may be more inclined to allow a relocation with all the availability and access. Now, you can have a parent-teacher conference probably on Zoom. You can watch little Tommy's dance recital on Zoom.
Yeah.
There's a lot more things that will be available.
So you think they'll be more flexible in allowing certain things to happen in this day and age?
Yeah, I'm guessing. I mean, you know, it's always interesting to me. I kind of have a front row seat of cultural change because I'm seeing how it plays out in family court. And so we see certain developments. I'm trying to think of one right now. I found that after 9/11, people were much more reasonable for about 2 weeks. So I wonder how.
Yeah, an epidemic.
To a lot, you know, there's a lot of theories that the quarantine, people being forced to live with their spouses in a marginal marriage is going to guarantee the divorce rate.
I've seen that. I've seen a lot of memes on social media about that. What is your guess about that?
Yeah, I'm guessing it will.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Spike.
Yeah.
Spike.
Yeah. One of the other topics that you mentioned on your website, which I found to be interesting because it wasn't something I actually really thought about, but I guess I probably should have, was the division of animals.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how maybe that also plays out in the high conflict? I imagine, as you say, it would be another layer.
Yes. Yeah, it's another issue. I have this high conflict case that's just never ending. My client is about ready to have a nervous breakdown. The case has been going on for 5 years. We tried it. They appealed. It came back for more deliberations by the trial judge. We had a second trial. They're appealing again. Well, anyways, during our first trial, they both were fighting over the family dog. And my judge was not a dog lover and was just not interested. And But, I understand it. I mean, I love my pets, and I look at them as surrogate kids, I guess. And, I understand the emotions. Our law changed, at least in Illinois recently, and I think culturally everywhere. People look at their pets differently than they used to. And so the law used to look at pets as personal property, okay? And what that would basically mean is the property laws of the state
Mm-hmm.
apply. So if a week before the marriage, the wife-to-be bought Rover, the family pet, and 5 years later, she had cared for Rover and took him to the vet, or let's say he did that. He took him to the vet, he cared for him, he walked him, he loved the dog went to the office with him, whatever the case may be. Under property law, Rover goes to the wife because she owned him before the marriage.
Sure.
So our legislature changed the laws now to consider best interest factors, like you would in a custody case, in terms of awarding the family pet. And so they would look at the fact that one parent was devoted to the child or to the animal. I call it child. That's
Yes.
was devoted to the animal, and that spouse would likely be the one that would be awarded the pet.
Wow.
Now, we also have changed our Domestic Violence Act,
Mm-hmm.
our orders protecting animals, pets of the family. Are you familiar with a book called No Visible Bruises?
Yes.
It rocked me to my core.
Yes.
And I learned about it on a podcast. I had listened to the author interviewed.
Okay.
And surprisingly, in a family law practice, I knew very little about how pervasive domestic violence is.
Absolutely.
And I would recommend all your listeners to read that book.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it sounds like that also extends to animals and other people, even children within the family, because I can imagine that dynamics get very complicated with divorce.
I have a case right now. My client loves her dog, who's not very well trained.
Okay.
He keeps letting the dog outside to run away, just as an act of mischief. And the judge actually kicked him out of the house a couple of months ago because of that sort of conduct. So, you see people using whatever, bad people, not everybody.
Yeah.
People using whatever opportunity they have if they want to hurt their spouse, whether it be, I know that the sun rises and sets on the kids for you, so I want to take them away from you.
Yes.
I know you love the dog Mabel. I am going to go take Mabel and put her down and not tell you. I mean, I've seen that actually.
Yes.
A spouse took the dog and euthanized the dog under some pretense. So,
Wow.
People that have that personality trait and want to hurt their spouse come up with a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah, they can be very malicious, and especially when running on these intense emotions, albeit negative emotions. Is there a time where you've become very concerned about your clients and you've wondered maybe because of the contentiousness of the other person that, maybe we need to stop, or maybe something else needs to happen because maybe there's some concern there?
Yeah. And I mentioned to you when we talked last week, I have a case right now where a client supposedly terminated my firm, but the termination letter was not written in a tone that was her writing style.
Mm.
And, we get emails from our client all the time. You can generally determine somebody's tone. And so it was somebody else writing the email terminating us. And I became very alarmed, and I'm limited because it's still going on right now in terms of what I can say about it.
Sure.
But I worry about people. I sometimes talk about them just not being strong enough to withstand the onslaught.
Yeah.
I have a number of cases where people just give up, and I hate to see somebody being rewarded for their bad behavior, but if somebody just doesn't have the fortitude or the strength or desire to carry on, and they just want to say, fine, whatever,
Yeah.
I'm owed $1, I'll take a dime, I just want to get it done.
Yeah. What do you do with the cases that you worry about?
What do I do?
Yeah. I mean, if you have someone that you're worried about, for example, this case, which I know you can't go too much into it, is there anything that you do more so on your firm's end when you have people like this that you're worried about?
Um, to the extent that we can do something, we
Mm-hmm.
do something. I would try to, if I thought that there was something funky going on,
Mm-hmm.
I would try to get it to the judge
Mm-hmm.
so that the judge at least knows to keep an eye on things.
Yeah.
Um, if I think a client is being intimidated or coerced
Yes.
into a settlement that is unfair, I'm going to have a long, hard talk with them, and again, try to get them to a therapist. Now, again, that being said, sometimes the most rational thing in the world is to take a settlement that is less than you otherwise would get, because the consideration is you're achieving peace of mind, right?
Mm.
So is it worth $30,000 to prolong the litigation for 6 months and to, have anxiety and insomnia,
Yeah.
upset stomach, and, so, I mean, sometimes, again, like my $1 million in a fishing boat lady, I mean, it's
Yeah.
very rational thought to want to accept
Yeah.
that.
I imagine that's a simplified version, and not to make light of anybody's situation, but I guess finances are maybe easier to walk away from than children.
They
When
are.
you have, does that change when you have someone that you're worried about when children are involved?
They are, although I see the same dynamic. I mean, I see people that will relent, and it's always very sad.
Yeah.
Whatever side I'm on. I've had cases where my client has really vigorously pursued custody of the kids, and the other parent was a good parent, but just couldn't stand the conflict and just said, okay, you can take the kids. And I didn't really feel good about that, but maybe the kids ended up in the right spot because
Mm-hmm.
my client was a stronger personality. I don't know. But so I see people just throwing up their hands and walking away from kids as well as money.
Do you see judges being much more understanding around these kind of issues where high conflict um, divorces are taking place, and then there's, say, abuse or manipulation or coercion going on? Do you feel like judges are much more understanding and sympathetic to that now?
I think they're trained at judges school. I think they're given an overview. I think a large part of it depends upon the skill of the lawyer,
Mm,
because world-class narcissists are very good at making the other guy look like he or she is the villain. They're very good at just placing blame or whatever on the other side. And if there is a good lawyer, and I like to think we're good lawyers, we can level that playing field,
yeah.
right? Because we can explain the reality and cut
Yeah.
through the fake news. But if somebody's got a crappy lawyer, sometimes they don't have the skill level to do that. And if the judge doesn't get the right information, the judge can't be protective, so to speak.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So with that being said, then, how would someone go through a screening process of finding a lawyer who may be understanding or can be savvy enough to represent them in that way and understand those dynamics? Is
That,
there something that, like a person that would be like hiring you or talk or just kind of, doing their Google searches for attorneys to kind of go through this stuff?
that's a really good question. Um, the best way to get a divorce lawyer is not necessarily to get a referral from your barber's cousin's plumber. So you need to do your own homework, right?
Okay.
It's a process. And
Yeah.
I say to people all the time when they come in and meet with me, it's always a good thing to interview several lawyers
Yes.
to see who you have a good comfort level with.
Mm-hmm.
Different lawyers have different styles,
Sure.
different personalities.
Yeah.
And you need to find somebody who you trust implicitly,
Mm-hmm.
who you connect with, who you have good rapport with,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody who's got the experience to handle the case.
Mm-hmm.
People, a lot of times clients will say to me, well, what is your philosophy? And it's a really hard question because I don't know that there is a per se philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I generally am a problem solver rather than a problem creator. Some lawyers are problem creators. Some people want a problem creator.
Yeah.
Some people want an obstructionist lawyer to fight every issue that there is. And, I look at cases pragmatically and what are the client's goals? What are the problems that we're trying to solve for the family and get everybody on with their life? But again, coming back to the narcissist divorce, these guys are not playing nice. And they are looking to win, to intimidate, to conquer. And that's when, to use a terrible metaphor again, I take the sword out. I mean, at that point, being Mr. Nice Guy isn't going to necessarily do anybody any good. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it sounds like a terrible process, but I imagine that with your average client, have they done their research on you? Have they figured out, or people just kind of just going through attorneys and consulting at this point?
Well, people will do their research. I mean,
Yeah.
they'll go to our website, they'll get
Yeah.
information from the website. They might read some of my articles.
Yeah.
They might talk to friends of theirs who are lawyers, for example. Do you know about this guy?
Yeah.
Some of my favorite referrals are from judges. I think that's a vote of confidence when a judge refers somebody.
Absolutely.
And so I think, yeah, most people they'll do their kind of background check
Mm-hmm.
and they'll come in and meet us and then they'll hopefully trust their intuition. And, sometimes we're just not a good fit. As I said before, somebody who wants me to just go beat her up, just, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not a good fit with that person.
Yeah.
I will admit that to them.
Good.
So.
Okay. Lastly, we're at the end of the hour. Can you tell us, about you, your practice, like if you have anything coming up, if your practice is diversifying in any way, or what you've got to offer there?
Well, like everybody else, my practice has become virtual, at least for the time being.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because we're having conferences with the judges now via Zoom. And starting in about 2 weeks, we're going to actually have trials and hearings
Wow.
with where I'll be cross-examining witnesses
Yeah.
on Zoom. And
Oh, wow.
I need to teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of prominent. My firm is expanding, it's growing. We're opening up a second location within the next couple of months. We just hired 2 new lawyers. My second job is writing books. I'm working
Oh.
on my 6th or 7th book at this point.
Nice.
It's called The Divorce Trial Manual, 2nd edition.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's about trying divorce cases. So it's coaching lawyers through the art and science of presenting evidence and presenting witnesses and making arguments. And I'm kind of a nerd. I really enjoy studying that stuff. I read a
Good.
lot of that sort of thing
Nice.
and read a lot of philosophy. I'm a big fan of the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius. And do you know who Tim Ferriss is?
I have heard of him. Yes.
He has a podcast and I listen to it, but he had described Stoicism as an operating system for people with stressful lifestyles. And, I don't know if you've read The Daily Stoic
I have not.
blog by Ryan Holiday, but that's a great resource. So, when I'm not working, I'm studying. My kids are all grown. I just have 2 beautiful pit bulls at home with my wife.
Nice.
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about what my practice does.
Yeah, you did. And if people want to get in touch with you or they're interested in consulting with you, you're only in Illinois? Do you only practice divorce law in Illinois?
My general speech to people is, I'll go anywhere if the case is the sort of case that I'm interested in. And so theoretically, if there were some really super interesting constitutional family law question in Oregon, I would look at something like that. You know what I'm saying? I'm at a point where that's interesting to me. Now, that being said, I'm not doing routine divorces anywhere but Illinois.
Okay.
But I do a lot of appellate work. I've been to our Supreme Court several times. I've written law review articles on child custody and things of that nature. So I am interested in topics like that.
Nice. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Email me at Steven, Steven, at Peskind Law, one word, PESKINDLAW.com, or at Steven Peskind on Twitter. Yeah, so I have a blog for lawyers, a Successful Lawyer blog, and it's for divorce lawyers. Anybody can subscribe, but it's primarily written to divorce lawyers. And we have a blog at our firm website, PeskindLaw.com, that I post my articles. June 1 is Narcissistic Awareness Day, I think.
Yes.
We'll be probably doing another post about that than we did last year as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and explaining your expertise beautifully. I think people are going to have a lot more clarity around this issue. And so I really appreciate your time in talking with myself and the listeners.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Nice to meet you, Doctor.
You as well. Thank you so much for tuning in to that interview. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, so please let us know via Instagram or Facebook post. And as always, if you have any questions for me, please do email me at adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. The Facebook group is open and accepting new members all the time. Questions are being posted. There is some engagement going on in there, so we'd love to have you on over at A Date with Darkness Facebook group. And be sure to tune into our YouTube channel because the podcast is also on YouTube. So you can see this very video, and the link will be posted in the show notes. And until next time, be sure to be kind to one another and be well.